reconciliation. So we continue to acknowledge the Turrbal and Jagera peoples, who are the first peoples of the land on which we live, walk and work here at the college and throughout Brisbane. We honour them and their ancestors for their survival, their continued traditions, and their spiritual connection to and caring of country, land, sky, water and sea. We pay respect to their elders past and present, and we will continue to support their right to self-determination. And we're committed to reconciliation and respectfully recognise that sovereignty has never been ceded. And we pray for wisdom to know how to make choices and even how to have conversations, our kind of culture with our kind of social media and so on. So this, of course, the first two lines of the Shema were the exercise for question 5 this week. They were also one of the bits of translation for those daily exercises during the break. So let's read this prayer, trying to get the kind of the flow of the.
You're always supposed to be seeing that.
You are supposed to be seeing it, and had I actually gone screen share, that would be working. It was on my screen. I don't know what's wrong with the rest of you.
I've got it too.
You don't get extra marks, you know.
Okay, sorry. I need to go to here, don't I? Yeah, Eve is not here tonight, Chris, so you can be the one that digs me in the ribs or throws book at me or something. Okay, so now I'll get back into this. Yep. Okay, so now I've got to hide the screen, which is all over the little pickies, which are all over my copy of the words. Oh, come on. Sorry, I'm trying to shrink this down. Yep. Now we can go, I think. Yes, I'm screen sharing. I know that. Just give me back my screen. Sorry, I really hate this software. Let's try again. Okay, and I want. Okay, so I'm going to hide the English so we can just look at what we're dealing with there on the screen. So I'll read it through slowly. And when we get down the bottom line, let's remember that most of the bets are V sounds, okay, which is a bit counterintuitive. Anyway, let's see how we go. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Wahabbata et Adonai Eloheka, your God, Bekol Levovka, Ubekol Nafshka, Ubekol Moedeka, for your strength with all your might. And coming to our Lord's Prayer, with the extra hyphen removed this week. Peter Haimon ha entois urinois, hagias theto to onoma su, el theto he basilia su, genetheto to thalema su, ha esurino kai epi geis. Ton aton haimon ton epiusion, dos humin heimen seimeron. Kai ephes heimen ta ophelemata haimon. Hos kai haimais, aphekaman tois opheletais haimon. Kai me eis enenkes humas eis pyrasmon, ala rusai hemas apo tu poneru. Apo tu poneru, from evil or from the evil one. Okay, So in our cultural knowledge, perhaps before the cultural knowledge, for the sake of those who are going to be watching the video later on, as well as those that are here at the moment, that's just a reminder of what I wrote on a number of the quizzes this week, which is simply, it is really important that you appreciate that the questions are carefully crafted. So I'll draft the questions, which was done some weeks ago for the weekly quizzes. They'll then go out to Chris and to Zoe for comment. They might be tweaked a little bit, and then I'll sit down to actually put them into Moodle. And even in doing that, I might spot a typo, or I might think of perhaps a better way to express it. But you can take it as a given in any subject you're doing in the University of Divinity, and indeed any university, that the lecturers have carefully thought about the questions, and the questions are structured to focus on particular points of learning that we're wanting to assess. So, for example, when there's a question that asks to briefly describe one physical feature of a typical Hellenistic city, telling me that it's built on a hill or that it's sitting on top of a hill because sewerage runs downhill is a wonderful way of telling me you listened to my class last week, but it's not describing an element of a typical Hellenistic city, because that's true of every city in the ancient world. The rich people always live on top of the hill because the air is cleaner at the top of the hill and the view is better. And it's the same in Brisbane today. Okay, the best bits of real estate, plenty of places like Ascot and so on, and they're on the hill and they don't get flooded. So in our language, property in flood zone is not as highly prized as property out of flood zone. It's the same disparity between rich and poor. And typically a well-written question actually gives you a little summary of the answer in the way the question is crafted. So you almost just have to turn the question inside out and answer it 1, 2, 3 as you respond. So it is worth taking the time, slowing down, and actually making sure you've looked at the question and what precisely is it asking us to do, because we can lose a hell of a lot of marks if we're in a rush and we don't pay attention to that. So just a little word on, I guess, exam technique. So I'm conscious I haven't yet made Zoe and Chris co-host, but I'll do that the next time I get back into Zoom properly. So this week, cultural knowledge, and we're going to be looking at, in a sense, sacred architecture, and we're going to be looking at the difference between a hieron, which is a temple, a synagogue, and a koinon, which is a clubhouse, basically a religious clubhouse. Okay, and often when we say koinon, we use koinonia, which is the group of the community that met at the koinon. In Latin, it's collegium. Okay, so it's a dedicated group of people around a particular focus. So it's a private association, whether it's religious or not. Okay. Now, modern examples of that are Rotary or Lions or Apex. They are perfect examples of clubs which meet for a special purpose. They have their own rituals, which don't make sense to people like myself who are not in them, and they look after each other, and they do lots of good things. But that's a perfect modern example of what an ancient koinon or koinonia was. So, temples, synagogues, and private associations. So last week we had a picture of the Acropolis at Athens, which probably inadvertently misled a whole lot of people to think that's what I was asking about in question 1, because I got lots of comments about the Acropolis and so on in Athens. Okay. Athens, by the way, was not a typical Hellenistic city. Okay, it's a Greek city, but it's not a Hellenistic city. Hellenistic cities are cities founded in the time and after the time of Alexander the Great, when you're in the Hellenistic period, when Greek culture has gone feral in the ancient Near East, but it's no longer pure Greek. And so a Hellenistic city or a Hellenistic Greek is different from classical Greek. So Hellenistic it's an important label to be aware of. Felicity's just raised her hand. Yes, Felicity, I can probably hear you even though I can't see you.
Hi, Greg. I just wanted to ask, so that question 1 in the weekly quiz, I thought the cultural questions were going to be based on what you talked to us about in the cultural knowledge section of the, the Thursday night. So did you actually give us all of that information during that? Did I just miss it? What a Hellenistic...
I think I did. I talked about the Cardo and the Decamanas. I talked about Greek cities, Hellenistic cities being established in the aftermath of Alexander. I talked about them as independent political entities that had a different kind of community self-view of themselves as belonging to the polis rather than belonging to the king, and who may or may not have had any kind of authority over them. I talked about the Decapolis as an example of a league of 10 cities, which were not part of Herod the Great's rule. He had no authority in those Greek cities because they were self-governing, autonomous cities. So I think it was covered. And I did make a distinction between ancient cities, which were just like sort of garrison towns built around a hill plus a secure water supply, and the Hellenistic cities, which were planted strategically as ways of spreading and maintaining Greek culture throughout the ancient world.
Okay. Thank you.
So yeah, I think it was covered very briefly because these segments, which I could talk about forever, are kind of peripheral to the language aspect.
That's okay. I just wondered if we were meant to be looking somewhere else for the answers, or if we are expected that the answer is in the text, the notes that we took during the session.
Well, the answers will be, and may or may not be in the notes. They'll be in the recording of what I said in class. And so interestingly, I had many people tell me about the importance of being on top of a hill because it's easier to shoot downhill than uphill. And many people tell me about how sewerage flows downhill, all of which I said in class, but they're not really the substantive issues about a Hellenistic city, which often were not built on hills.
Oh, yeah.
They just had to adapt the perfect model of a grid-like city. They had to adapt that to the particular geography they found themselves on. So they weren't necessarily on top of a hill. It just depended where the city was being put. Like the city of Alexandria is in the delta of the Nile River. It's not built on a hill. So hilliness is not an essential attribute of a Hellenistic city, although it's a desirable thing if you have one going spare. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so thanks. And I can't actually see, I've turned off or I've hidden the pictures of who's in the group. So please raise your hand or just yell out as the case may be. So this week, instead of the Acropolis, we're looking at a reconstruction of Herod's temple in Jerusalem. And the point I want to make, and this is a really big point, is that ancient temples are the religion of the whole city, and everybody in the city is expected to turn up on the big holy days. So that site of the temple, these days it's the Haram al-Sharif or the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, that's basically the site of all the land at St. Francis College. Okay, it's a very large bit of dirt. It's about 11 acres. Okay? It's a very big bit of land in a very crowded city. And it's not so much that it's elevated, but it is a little bit higher than the sort of residential neighborhood.
Trees.
Sorry?
Not a single tree.
No, that's right. And the idea of being at that space was that crowds and crowds of people would be there. Okay, so I think the nearest equivalent in our culture is the War Memorial in Canberra. They don't expect you to have 5,000 people inside the War Memorial, but they do plan for 5 or 10,000 people out in the courtyard, in the plaza. Okay. And I think we might have said something like that about the Anzac Memorial in Ann Street. So to give a contemporary example of exactly the same place, this is what the Dome of the Rock looks like on a high Muslim festival. Okay. They will put a couple of 100,000 people into that space.
Everyone's so uniformly lined up.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as part of their prayers, they're going to be bending down and touching the forehead on the ground and so on. So you've got to be kind of in rows.
That happened in Brisbane on Friday. It was quite moving. I wasn't understanding exactly what was happening, but there were lines in protest in silence, and then they went on a march.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Friday afternoon or something. Yeah. Yeah. So that's a really good example of when it's the religion that everybody in town belongs to, like the worship of Athena in Athens or Artemis in Ephesus, then the Temple of Artemis, the Temple of Athena, whatever, is a relatively small building with a massive plaza. Entirely the opposite of most Christian religious architecture, with the exception of St. Peter's in Rome, which is a massive, dirty, big building, but actually it's designed to have thousands of people outside in the courtyard. Okay, because it's a different sort of dynamic. Okay.
So sorry, what was that one called? Just for my own.
Okay, so we're looking at the Temple Mount. That's the second temple. I mean, it's a model of the temple, scale model of the temple in the time of Jesus.
Very convincing.
Yeah, because I've cut them. You can't actually see the people walking around the outside. Okay, it's at the Israel Museum. This is more or less the same site. I mean, it's a picture of the Haram al-Sharif, the most noble sanctuary, and it's a major feast day for the Muslim people. So there are thousands of them there. Okay, thousands and thousands of people packed in. So that's it's the same site. So it's the Haram al-Sharif in Jerusalem. Now, again, so remember we said temples, and then we talked about synagogue. I said we'd look at synagogue. This is a first century synagogue from Gamla up in the Galilee. Actually, it's on the Golan Heights. We know about Gamla because it was one of the cities. It was a fortified city during the Jewish revolt against the Romans, and it took the Romans quite a while to capture the city because it was built on this little tiny ridge, very steep sides, looks a bit like a camel, and that's why the town was called Gamala, because it looked a bit like a camel. Okay, but they did get in the end. So one of the things we found, archaeologists found at Gamla, when it was excavated a few decades ago, they found a first century synagogue. That's a totally different scale of building. You could have 30 or so people in there. Okay, they come in through the entrance. You can see where the doorway is. And what you can't see is just outside the doorway and to the left, there's a mikveh, a place for people to do the sort of ritual washing, make themselves pure before they go into the synagogue. Okay, so this is designed to have a much smaller group of people, in fact, men only, in the synagogue, and they would sit around on benches on the outside, and they would read Torah and say prayers and so on. Okay, so very different kind. And of course, there's no sacrifices at a synagogue, whereas there are sacrifices at a temple. Okay, so that's again one of the differences. So that's a synagogue. A synagogue is more like what we have in a typical parish church. Okay, a place that can seat 50 or 100 people or whatever. And during the week will be used for other kind of community events, or like youth groups or a school, whatever. Okay. And then the third, I'm just showing you pictures just before we talk about the theory. So the next image coming up is the dining room, the refectory from Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were probably created, and certainly where they were found. So here's a dining room that could have up to a couple of hundred people sitting down for a meal. Basic meal, not lots of different dishes, but in fact, the room that's just off to the right, see a little bit of an opening. In that room, they found the crockery. There were hundreds and hundreds of just jars sitting on shelves which had collapsed, but the jars were still intact. So we know that's an eating room because we found the crockery room next door. Okay, so that's again a small special purpose religious community, and this was where the people from the Yahad, the community at Qumran, this is where they met for their meals, and their meals were special, had special rituals around them. Okay, and then we're looking on the island of Delos in the Aegean. We've got the koinon, so the clubhouse of the people who belong to Poseidon. Okay, so the Poseidonias, the devotees of this Greek god. Okay, Poseidon. So, and I'm just putting up the sketch plan. You can see it's a much smaller scale, and it's designed to have. It's got a courtyard, and those little dots in the right-hand corner, that's like a courtyard that has a whole series of columns supporting the roof, and maybe an open courtyard, but some shaded area coming out to the middle. And then the top left-hand corner is their secret squirrel meeting room. Okay, and we can see what we're talking about here. Okay, so a much different space. The sacred space is structured very differently. So you go from the temple, the sort of civic religion of the polis, which will have an area for thousands of people to gather for the really big moments. But the sort of the church part, the temple part, will be a relatively small structure, inside of which will be a statue of the god. Okay, and there'll be a few storerooms and other facilities. When you're looking at it, and that's much the same for the temple in Jerusalem, except there was no statue. Okay. In the case of the synagogue, as we've seen, it's designed to be a place where you can gather for conversation and discussion and to read and to pray. That's the purpose. But notice, even synagogue, one of the definitive expressions of Judaism, has a Greek word, Greek name, as does Sanhedrin, the name for the governing council of the Jewish community at the time. So the Hellenistic culture had penetrated Jewish religious observances so that they used Greek words for some of their most Jewish distinctive institutions. Okay. Okay, so what does that mean? I've just tried to show you some different examples. So we talked very early on, weeks and weeks ago, about there really only being two domains: the public domain of politics, but of course politics is the polis, the public domain of the city, and then the family, the kinship system. So civic religion, the religion of the polis, centered on temples and shrines. And given that there were, these were not sort of monotheistic cultures, there'd be a particular god who might be, the favorite one in that city. Like for Athens, it was Athena. For Ephesus, it was Artemis, and so on. In Jerusalem, it was Yahweh. So you'd have the major temple belonging to that person, but in a society which is in fact polytheistic, two more Greek words, many gods. Okay, then there are going to be a whole series of temples. One of them at least will be richer and have more social kudos. So in Athens, that's the Temple of Athena. But there'll be other significant temples. So when I showed you the pictures from Jerash last week, on the map, there were the reference to different temples to different gods. And later on in the Byzantine period, that included different Christian cathedrals in amongst the temples. Okay, so temples and shrines, there could be shrines at different points along the roads, and in particular where the Cardo intersected with the Decumanus, what was called the Tetra Pylon, the 4 pillars, there would be images of the gods on each of those 4 pillars. Okay. So these were mostly outdoor events with large numbers of participants. In the villages more distant from Jerusalem, and even in Jerusalem itself, eventually, you get the development of synagogues. In this case, I've written synagogae, which is the plural of synagogae. So in Galilee and further afield in the diaspora, you find synagogues. And synagogues were like the Jewish version of the private clubhouse. But the thing that these people were united by was their Jewish identity and their Jewish religious practices. These were intended as indoor gatherings of very small numbers of people, and maybe during the week they were used as schools or community centres. And certainly in the third, fourth, and fifth century in northern Israel, northern Palestine, you get the development of very large Jewish synagogues, which were the Jewish community center in a culture that was increasingly becoming Christian. Okay, but you get these large synagogues. Then we get the koinon or koinonia, which were the fellowships, or if you like, the cult associations. Sometimes they were craft-based. So if you were like Paul, a tent maker, you would have access to the tent makers club association, whatever. These are going to be particularly found in cities that are trade centres, because you're going to have people from elsewhere coming through, and they're going to want a place to catch up and do their own religious activities. So these were private gatherings, whereas the synagogue is a community gathering. The koinon or the koinonia were private gatherings for the initiated, and you had to go through various ceremonies to be initiated into the club. Starting to sound like a church. They shared meals together. There were various rituals they did. They looked after each other's funerals. They provided support for widows and so on. So it was a place where people found a degree of intimacy when perhaps they didn't have access to their normal kinship system. So it's like a fictive family. Okay. And guess what? Their major office bearers were called episkopoi and diakonoi, bishops and deacons. Okay. So, surprise, surprise, what Paul is setting up in different places around the Greek world are little koinonia, he called them ecclesia, dedicated to the worship of Christ. They gathered for a meal and they had to be baptized, and they had to maintain certain rules about ethical behavior and sexual behavior. And one of the questions was about meat, because the only way you got meat in a Greek city was you went to the temple, because that's where the animals were slaughtered, and you could buy meat. So are Christians allowed to buy meat from the temple? And so this is one of the practical questions Paul had to deal with. Okay, so the architecture is reflecting the role of religion at the level of the polis, at the level of the village or the community, and at the level of the private voluntary association that you choose to join. You go through a process of initiation and you abide by the rules and you look after each other. Okay? So the architecture will be very different. Okay, I'm just going to take a break and try and make sure I've got some of the setups done for
Part of a little
co-hosting and so on. So I'm going to make sure that Zoe is a co-host, and yes, and I'm going to make sure that Chris is a co-host,
You can have your Queen.
All right. So any questions about the sort of sacred architecture and the scaling of temple? And the Greek word is hieron, because the Greek word for priest is hieros. And so our word hierarchical means ruled by the priests. Okay, or hierarchy is a priest in a proper line, in power. Okay. Yes, Felicity.
Sorry, just during that, you were saying about a word polis, political.
Yep.
So is that,
Yep.
sorry, did you say that's a Greek word, polis?
Yes, a Greek word for city, which we had in our vocab
Oh, yeah, we did.
sometime in the last few weeks.
Sorry.
Yes, that's what I'm doing. No, that's fine. That's why I'm trying to stitch this all together and join the dots, because to me they're obvious, but I'll just rattle them off as I go through. But that's why I kept saying, so polis is about politics. It's about the city. And we said there were two domains, the political domain. Polis is the English word, political, sorry, is the English word that comes from polis, meaning the city. The city is not the same as a kingdom. Okay, the kingdom can be a much bigger area. The city is a location and it has a unique identity. So, for example, I live at Forest Lake, which of course is part of the city of Brisbane, but actually Forest Lake is a unique, self-defined kind of area. We're just pretending Inala is not next door. And those of us who live at Forest Lake, we're more likely to say we're from Forest Lake rather than we're from Brisbane. Okay, because it has a kind of identity. Now, it's not expressed in an actual civic autonomy, although originally it was. Originally, even the Brisbane City Council didn't mow our grass, didn't mow our footpaths. It was done by the developer. And then after a certain number of years, it got handed over to the Brisbane City Council, and the grass has been raggy ever since. So I could go up to the shops, to the shopping centre, and when I was the priest at Forest Lake, I could just stand in the food court and catch up with my parishioners, because everybody in Forest Lake goes to that shopping centre. I'm sure it's the same at Springfield. Whereas if I was at Coorparoo, having gone to Coorparoo High as a kid, not even Coorparoo shopping centre is anything like. There's no kind of civic centre for Coorparoo or Camp Hill or Norman Park. You might say Southside.
Yeah.
You might say Bayside.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why so polis is it's a self-conscious civic community which structures itself in various ways in favour of land-owning males, okay, who were born there, not foreigners. Just sounds like Australia in a way. And they aspired to have all the things that a Hellenistic city wanted to have, which was not only a proper street system with a Cardo and a Decumanus at a shopping centre in the main street, the Cardo that we talked about in Jerusalem last week. They also aspired to have a gymnasium where the boys went to learn and to study and to compete in physical exercises, because training the body was an important part of Greek education. It wasn't just a mind thing. They wanted to have a hippodrome, they wanted to have a theatre, and so on. So there were various civic institutions which a proper Greek city, proper Hellenistic city would aspire to have. And that caused challenges for Jewish people, for example, because if you sent your boy to the gymnasium for a Greek education, so he'd get a good job in the future, then he's going to compete in the games at the gymnasium naked. And all the other kids are going to laugh at him because he's been circumcised. And Jewish people would be offended at the idea of going to the gymnasium and seeing naked people doing somersaults or whatever. So you can see the very the civic architecture and DNA of a Hellenistic city was inherently offensive to Jewish people, and probably to some other Easterners as well. So there's conflict, there's social conflict and so on. Okay. All right. Now we're going to have a look at our biblical focus text for this week, which is Romans 1, 16 and 17. So I think the best way to do this is for you to each go into your copy of Accordance. And I'm going to show you, I'm not going to worry about the PowerPoint at the moment, but I'm going to try and share my Accordance installation, except it's not showing up yet. Okay. Let me make it active. Oh, okay. That's a leftover from what we're doing before. Share screen, Accordance, here we go. So hopefully that's now showing up. We're just playing around before as to how you might copy and paste parsing information into Moodle. That's a story for another day. Okay, so we're going to look at Romans 1, verses 16 to 17. So please go ahead and do your magic with Accordance. So we're going to be looking at it in the Greek, of course, New Testament Greek. So for now, we can just I'm just going to shut my Hebrew panel because there's no point in having Hebrew open when I'm looking at Romans chapter 1. Okay. So I'm going to hit the tab and then I'm going to go Romans 1, 16, 17. Okay. Now, if I've got a whole screen full of stuff, that means this little slider bar up here is at the wrong point. So push the slider bar back to 0 and you'll just have the passage you asked for. Okay. Now we're going to jump out of the plane without a parachute. So let's shut the English. Uh-oh. Okay, we've only got the Greek. And we can make it bigger or we can do various things. Okay. I've still got my floating instant details. So as I go over stuff, it's going to tell me what it is. But I want us to do something we haven't done before. I want us to go to interlinear. So come with me over on the right. You see there's a little symbol that's got like 2 lines or 3 lines. Then it's got like an insert. Then it's got 2 or 3 lines. That's the symbol for interlinear. And the pop-up text is saying choose interlinear. So what is it do we want to display? So I'm just going to click on that up. So I want just a regular interlinear. So let me just first off show you what's there. So go interlinear. Okay. Now it's going to open okay, so it's displaced the other one. That's fine. So I've still got, it's just showing me Romans 1, 16 and 17. It's giving me the strong key numbers, which I don't need for this purpose. Obviously, it's showing me what's in the New Testament. Fine. It's also showing me the lexical form, but actually, we're not going to, let's leave it there for now, but it's not really going to be much use to us. It's giving us the parts of speech, like particle, conjunction, verb, article, noun, noun, conjunction, noun. Okay. You with me, folks?
Yep.
It was just on the other tab. He couldn't.
Yeah, we found it.
Okay. So when I go into the define my interlinear, I'm going to turn off the key numbers. They've gone. I'm going to turn off the lexical form because we're big people now. We're going to get by without that. Well, you can do what you like. I'm going to turn it off for my purposes. Okay. But I am going to turn on a little English gloss just to give us a heads up about the translation. Okay. So once upon a time, this would have been really exciting, but actually Bible software has developed so much further now. It's like, really? Do we really need this? But we used to all have interlinear Greek New Testaments, and we tried not to let the lecturer see that that's what we had on our lap. We'd have a Greek New Testament that he could see, and he'd ask us, what's this word? And we'd go, well, I think it's
It's good to know that
It looks to me like it might be Urkamai, whatever. Okay, Jenks, now shut your interlinear and tell me what you actually know. Well, that won't take very long, sir, will it? Okay, all right. So this is kind of taking that and making it interactive because you can decide what information you want. So for the purpose of tonight, let's work our way through Romans 1. We may not get through the 2 verses completely, but let's go through and just enjoy the bits that are now starting to make sense. Both of them. No, I didn't say that. But enjoy to the extent that this is going, aha, of course, yes, I know that. Okay. So, oo, we may remember, it's a particle, but it means it's a negative particle. So, no or not. Okay. Gar is a ghastly little, no. Gar is that little because or for, but it can never be at the beginning of a sentence. Okay, it's always got to be in a second location. But in English, we have to say it first. Okay, then we've got episkuomai or episkounomai, which we're not going to know. But the instant details are going to tell us as well. Okay, so it's a, that's what I haven't turned on. We can also turn on, I guess it's the syntax, or is it the tag? It's called a tag, okay? So the tag is giving us like first person singular, present, middle, indicative. But it's using PR for present, MD for middle, IND for indicative. So it's almost like another little language in terms of abbreviations. Okay, so I'm going to turn off my instant details. How do I do that? I don't know. I guess I can go up here and turn it off. Okay, so I'm just going to work with the interlinear for this purposes. So we're working through, we've got, not, because, for, espaikunamai, which is we probably figure out it's probably a verb because something ending with mai sounds like urkamai and prosukamai and various other verbs will come across from time to time. And yeah, that's what we used to call a deponent verb, but it's a middle form because it's about me. It's actually meaning to be ashamed. And Paul is saying, so I'm not ashamed. Okay, because it's shame, it's not active, it's more middle. Because if I'm feeling ashamed, I'm saying something about me. I'm not saying something about you. I'm not saying you're shaming me. I'm saying, no, I'm cool. I'm not ashamed. Before I am not ashamed. Ashamed of what? To euangelion. Euangelion is the word meaning good news, gospel. Okay. And it's going to be accusative because it's what Paul is not ashamed of. It's the direct object of his not being ashamed. What is it I'm not ashamed of? To euangelion, the gospel. Okay, notice, by the way, when you have g, it becomes ng. Euangelion. Okay, so and if you're looking at the parsing and the tag, it's telling us neuter, singular, accusative. So not because I'm ashamed. So because I'm not ashamed of the gospel, we'd have to say of, but I'm not ashamed about the gospel. Okay. And then we've got another little phrase that also uses gar. So dunamis, gar, theo, estin. 4 really cute little words. Dunamis, you can see it there. It's a noun. It's a feminine noun. It's singular. It's nominative, and it means power, strength, capability, authority, or force. It's the word from which we get dynamite or dynamic duo, whatever. That's Chris and I, in case you're wondering. Okay, or Chris and Zoe maybe. So he says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, and then we get gar because power, Theou, dunamis theou, power of God. Eston. And we've come across Eston a few times. It's the, well, again, you've got the answers there. Now, these haven't lined up properly. So the conjugation, okay, when I put my cursor over gar, you can see conjunction, coordinating, okay. When I go to theou, noun, masculine singular genitive, of God. Theos, theou. And then we've got the verb, third person singular, present indicative active. It's the verb to be or to exist. So I'm not ashamed of the euangelion because is the power of God. Now, I'm sure in your normal English Bible, it's rather more smooth than that, okay? But you can see how it's expressed in Greek. Not, for, and again, gar has to come second, okay? But so I'm not ashamed of the gospel because it is God's power, or it is the power of God, okay? And then we've got the kind of power, the purpose of the power. Eis soterion. Eis is a preposition. In this case, it's indicating the purpose. It's the power of God for the purpose of soterion, salvation. A soter is a savior. Soterion is what a savior does, salvation. Okay. The beautiful verb sozo is I save. Okay. So it's the power of God. Isoterion is the power of God, like resulting in salvation. Okay. So here it's got into or to. And then salvation for what? Panti to pistuanti. And you're immediately going, oh, dative, 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 dative. Three little datives all in a row. Sure, that's what you're all thinking straight away. So you've got an adjective, and we know passapan, it means all or every. This is the dative singular of pass, okay? And all what? All to pistuanti. And this, if we look at this, we haven't done participles yet, but it's a verb. It's a present accusative participle, masculine, present active. Got to get my head around their out of date abbreviations. Present active participle. So it means literally the believing ones. But we would translate that as the believers. Okay, the believing ones. So panti, to, pistuanti. These are all datives. That means they're all linked together. I think I heard Chris say something about that last week. When three words are all the same gender, the same number, and the same case, they're a package. They hang out together. So panti, to, pistuanti is for everyone who, or for all of the believers, or for all of the believing ones. And of course, that gets a bit awkward. We say for all the believers. Okay, or all those who believe. By Tommy, get the sandpaper out and turn it into nice English. Okay, so this is, I'm not ashamed of the gospel because it is, the gospel is, Eston, the power of God for salvation for everyone who believes, pantito pistuanti. Then we've got eudio, still dative, eudio. See, there's a little iota under the omicron. Okay, so it's dative. And we've got a little pairing here with two conjunctions, tet and kai. Okay, we're familiar with kai. You won't remember that about 3 weeks ago or 5 weeks ago in real time, I mentioned a couple of pairs of conjunctions. One of them is tet and kai, which is like both and. Okay, so here, well, look at that. I haven't even been looking at this. I really just actually know some of this stuff. How amazing. Okay, so one of the meanings for tet is that it's both and. Okay, and only when it goes with kai coming up shortly after. Okay, it's like our phrase either or, both and, or and slash or. It's one of those sort of things. Okay, so it's the power of God for salvation for all the believing ones. Iudaio tet proton, and it's not a car from Korea. Okay, so what might proton be?
Protestant.
Oh. So did you say person?
Protestant.
No, it's nothing about Protestants. No. No. Protos or proton. So it means first, like prototype. Okay, but look at the.
I was thinking of anatomy.
Yeah, well, the proton in terms of nuclear
Yeah.
cells, proton is like one of the smallest elements in the molecule.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a much later concept of proton.
Okay.
They weren't speaking of protons in the 1st century, but proton just means first, prominent, or former, and that's why they use proton for this essential item in every element. Okay, so proton. So all the ones believing first, the Jews, Kai, and then Hellenai, the Greeks. A noun, that's just the Greek word for Greek. Okay? So if you go to Greece, you won't see, even Greek, when you won't see gamma, rho, epsilon, kappa. You know, that's not how they write the name of their country. They'll have HELNN, an eta, Hellene, which is why we talk about Hellenistic. Okay? That's the Greek word for Greek. So first for the Jews, and this time Kai means then, okay, or even and also, something like that. First the Jews and then the Greeks, okay. All right, so is this just checking in a reality check? Is this making any sense at all? Are you beginning to say, yes, this is why we're learning Greek? Or is it just like, when is he going to move on to verbs?
No, it wasn't a couple of weeks ago, like this, but it's starting to make sense with the exercises, and I'm trying to pick them out throughout the week as well to try and get it in my head.
Yep.
So I think the English version all the time, oh, it's this because I've read it in English, but I've got to stop doing that. It's not that, it's more.
Yeah. So somebody with a kind female voice was going to say something as well. You were being kind, but someone else was making a comment. But what? So please, that person, come back and continue what you were starting to say. I'll have a drink.
I was just saying I'm learning more. I am better at the Greek than the Hebrew, but I am learning.
Yeah, well, remember, Paul spoke both, so that's not going to help us. Okay, I was going to say Paul spoke Greek, but actually spoke Hebrew as well. Should just drop that line. Okay, so what I'm hoping to do is, by going through like phrase by phrase, there's not many things here we haven't actually come across before, but we're getting a whole pile of them in one cluster, because that's how it happens in the Bible. The Bible doesn't appear as a vocab list. It's real words put into real sentences. And these sentences are not the way we think in English. So you're probably beginning to think, wow, that's not what the NIV has. That's not what the NRE, you know, it's kind of pretty awkward when you just do it literally. But that's the first baby step before you translate it. So from the top, I am not, so not, therefore, I am ashamed of the gospel, because it is, so Eston means he, she, or it is. Okay, it's third person singular of the verb to be. And notice in Greek, because everything is inflected, you can put the words anywhere you want in order to emphasize what's most important. So Paul could have said, Ga esten dunamis theou. Okay, because it is the power of God. But no, he wants to emphasize dunamis. So he moved dunamis up to the start of the phrase, okay? Because dunamis theou esten. Okay, this is the power of God. And he's wanting to emphasize the power of God rather than this is. Okay. Power of God for salvation, isoterion, panti to pistuanti, for all the believers, all the ones believing. And there's a whole other week's class sometime about what does pistuo mean. Jews first and also Greeks. So this is for everybody, all the believers, whether they're Jewish or Greek. Starts out with the Jews, but actually it's for everybody. All right, let's see if we can finish off this second verse. Dikaiosune ga theou en auto apocalyptatai. Now that's going to sound wonderful to your ears. So let's unpack it a little bit. Dikaiosune is righteousness or justice. So looking at the elements in the interlinear, it's a noun. It's feminine. Well, we know it's feminine because it's probably feminine because it ends with an eta. It's singular, it's nominative. Yep. Dikaiosune, dikaiosines, and so on. We know how that noun's going to work. Ga, well, that's because, since, indeed, whatever. God, theou. Okay. So this is the righteousness of God, but Gar has got in the middle because that's what Gar does. And det and so on, they sneak into the second spot. Okay. So because the dikaiosune theou, so the righteousness of God, and auto, in it, autos, aute, auto, third person pronoun. In this case, it's referring back to tot euangelion. So I'm not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God and because in it, en auto, and I love this word, not just because my PhD was in apocalyptic, apocalyptatai, it's a verb. It's third person singular. Well, you won't be surprised about that one day because tai is how those sort of verbs often go. It's present, it's middle, and it's indicative. Okay. And it means to reveal, but it's middle. So means because the dikaiosune theou, the righteousness of God, in it, in the gospel, is revealed, is uncovered. So apocalyptic, apocalypse, this is the verb, and apocalypse means, or the verb, it means to uncover, to reveal, to stop hiding. Okay, so the righteousness of God is revealed in the gospel. And then we've got this beautiful phrase, ek pistios eis piston. Now we know about ek and we know about eis. Okay, ek is meaning out, not away from, that's apo, but ek is like exit. Okay, and eis is going towards. Okay, so this is the righteousness of God, which is revealed in the God news, ek pistios eis piston, from faith to faith. Okay. So noun, feminine singular genitive, pistios, faith, belief, trust, value, proof. Piston, noun, feminine singular accusative. So this is the same word, just this is genitive, this is accusative, but it's exactly the same word. Okay. And it means faith, believe, trust. So from faith to faith. Paul has some incredibly compact theological phrases that he used sometimes. And this is a huge idea that the gospel is God's power to save, reveals the righteousness and so on. from faith to faith. Okay, and there's a whole essay to be done sometime on just those 4 words. All right, and then guess what? He's going to quote the same bit of the Old Testament as we looked at the other week. Gegraptai. Okay, let's look at that. It's a verb. 3rd person, singular, perfect, middle indicative. And we'll talk about the perfect perhaps later tonight or next week. But one of the features, so it's the verb grapho, meaning I write, but it's become perfect. And so in the process of that, it becomes gegraptai. And because it's middle. So because it is written, or in this case, kathos, just as gegraptai, just as it is written. And now he's going to quote Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4, or misquote Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4. Okay? There, because hot dikaios, the righteous person, ek pistios, ek pistios, this is where you can see Paul's brain working here. He's saying ek pistios eis piston. Now he's got de hot dikaios, because the righteous person, ek pistios, setai. It's a verb, 3rd person singular, future, notice the sigma, future middle indicative, to live. Okay, so just as it is written, the righteous person from faith will live. Or is it the righteous person by faith will live? I mean, there's a bit of ambiguity we saw the other day in that verse in Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4. Okay? So that's a bit of a deep dive into 2 of the perhaps most important verses in the New Testament, where Paul is writing to a bunch of people in Rome that he's never met, and he's introducing himself and where he's coming from theologically. Okay? And he's laying it down, I'm not ashamed of the good news, okay, because it's the power of God for salvation for everyone who believes, first for the Jews, then for the Greeks, because God's righteousness is revealed from faith to faith, just as it is written, the just will live by faith. Paul's on a bit of a roll in Romans 1, 16 and 17. Questions, comments?
Greg, can I ask
Yes.
you- So if you were going to say to us, okay, give me a literal translation of verse 17 there, would it
Yep.
be, because I'm trying to downpat what, sometimes I just think maybe too hard about it, and maybe I'm overthinking how we need to do this. So would it be righteousness for God is revealed? It is revealed through faith, for faith, just as written. The righteous.
Yeah, we tried to say that. Yeah, that's very close. And it is tricky, hard to do, because it's not proper English when we're doing it. But as you move from Greek or Hebrew into idiomatic English, you have to go through the stage of having a very literal translation. But a literal translation won't do it in the end. Okay.
Yeah.
So just took what these lines down here, what I think they called it the gloss before. That's not going to work, but it's very close to the literal translation. Okay, so verse 17, if I was trying to do a literal translation, I'd have to keep in mind that although gar comes second in the Greek, it must come first in English.
Right. Okay.
Because we've got to allow for these words that have bouncy strings on them, kind of thing. So I'd say something like, because God's righteousness is revealed in it, from faith to faith, just as is written, or just as has been written, the righteous person will live by faith. Or I could say the righteous person by faith will live. To me,
See,
that's
I don't think I'd get to that if I was just looking at 17. I would probably only get to that if I'd read 16 first and understood that 16 was talking about, salvation.
absolutely, because
Yeah. Okay.
you don't know by looking at verse 17 what en auto refers to.
Yeah. Okay.
In what?
Some of
We've got to go
British
back to the
have.
verse before. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes more
So-
sense. I was trying to do it in isolation, but maybe you do need to read the verses before it too.
Yeah. And even so, we're just looking at 16 and 17. That's a soundbite. But
Yeah.
but you can see why I couldn't stop at just 16.
Mm.
In order for 16 to kind of get what Paul was talking about, we need to read verse 17. But to understand what Paul is talking about in verse 17, we've got to have read verse 16. You can't really just have one. You've got to take the whole package.
Yeah.
And if we were doing a lectionary, language chat every week or so, or once a month or whatever, we would probably spend a whole hour just looking at these two verses. We wouldn't spend a month, would we, Chris, looking at these two verses?
Well,
Tell me we wouldn't spend a month.
Depends on where you are, I suppose.
yes, we might spend a month at St Paul's.
Okay. All right.
Probably not.
Okay. So let me I'm going to stop sharing. 7:10. So I've got about 30 minutes left. Put my running skates on. Okay. So I'm going to try and turn the gallery back on so I can see who's there. Make it. Not quite. Okay. That's not going to work either. Okay, I'll just go back to what I was doing and not worry about seeing your faces. Okay, so now I'm going back into my slides with a bit of luck. Okay, so all I put in the slides, which you can access through the website, you can see this now. So first I put the text. Oh, don't worry about the red circle. First, I just put the text, and look how clean it looks when you don't have all that interlinear stuff messing it up. Okay. Uga epis kunamai ton evangelion, dunamis gar theu estin, isoterion panti to pistuanti, eudai te proton kai heleni, dikaiosune gar theu en auto, apocalyptatai, ek pistios eis piston, kathos gegraptai, hot det dikaios ek pistios zeisatai. Okay, that's without all the gobbledygook from the interlinear. And there's a little picture of Paul. He asked me to show you that.
Paul did.
Paul did, yeah, we chat all the time. So on the left-hand side, I've got, which we can do in accordance. That's what the passage looks like in the Codex Sinaiticus. All written in capitals, some abbreviations that have the little horizontal line, and no spaces between the words.
All of a sudden, we've gone back to week 1 and 2.
Yeah, well, it's a spiral. We're constantly dipping into stuff we already know.
Sorry, I'm just going to get a different chair. This is killing my...
Sure, there may be oh yeah, you got those straight ones. Okay, and then I've just put 16 and 17 in the interlinear there, but we didn't use it ourselves. Okay, so let's talk about another layer of the...
Can I ask one more question just before you move away from that? You know, when
Absolutely.
you do the word chart in accordance,
Yep.
is there any way to copy it with the table lines or not?
That's what we were... Okay, good question. Chris knows how to do it because he's super clever. But if you're not clever, but you're clever enough to have an apple, it's dead simple.
I've got
That's
nothing.
why I didn't realize some people couldn't do it when I made the exercise in week 1 or something. So let me show you. I have to go into screen share or whatever. Stop share. Share. Accordance. Good question, because now's the time to talk about it. So suppose I get rid of this. Well, that's very good, Greg. Okay, let me just go into Greek New Testament, and I've managed to lose what I had, but let's go Romans 1, 16, 17. Okay, so there it is. Now, if I was to take all, well, I can go select all, obviously, but if I drag and select, if I go to the parsing tool, I get a thing like this. Okay. So it gives me what's in the text, and it gives me a transliteration of what's in the text, which is really a waste of space, but never mind. And then we get the lexical form of the Greek, and then we get even that put into English letters, transliterated. Finally, we get to the syntax, and then we get to that. Now, if you did want to copy all that, which I would not recommend, on a Mac, I just go Command A, copy all, I'll select all. I copy it, and I can paste that into a Word document, and I can actually paste it straight into the Moodle, and it sticks. That clearly doesn't work if we're coming from a PC. It's just one of the differences that's there between a Mac and a PC. However, if I went into Word Chart, which is this one here, half covered up, then you're going to get a thing like this, which you might be familiar with. And again, I can go in here and I can go copy all, and sorry, select all, copy, and then again, I can paste it in, but only, it seems, only if I'm using a Mac. That is one reason why I've now added the option for people to do their answers in a Word document and then just upload that page in. So, for example, if I was wanting to copy that into Word, I'm just opening my Word at the moment because I haven't had it open yet. Let's say new document. So there's the new document. I just go paste, and there it is. Now, it's a bit ugly because it's actually a table, and I've just pasted it in, but it's all there. So if I was not particularly wanting to make it easy for my marker, I could just upload that into Moodle or whatever. If I'm wanting to be a bit nicer, I could select all of that, and I could go table, convert.
It's not coming up on the.
It's not coming out
That's
because
all
I
right.
haven't.
I know what
Yeah.
you're doing.
Yeah, I haven't told it to share Microsoft Word. Okay, so it is possible to convert that and to say, I want 6 columns, work that out. I want it to be separated by tabs. And now, if I can get back into Zoom from, not Zoom, what am I doing? Yeah, Zoom, come back, Zoom. We're going to stop screen share, start it again. And in Word,
Select it all.
here, okay, I've been able to turn it back into a really nice, neat set of tables.
That's great. Thank you.
That's fine if you're doing an assignment. You probably don't want to stuff around with that if you're doing a weekly quiz,
Okay.
because it might use up too much of your time.
Yeah. So you are happy for it just to be copy and pasted in, and it's a bit higgledy-piggledy?
I don't care if it's, I just want to see that you can show me you know how to find this stuff. I'm not worried about whether I'm not teaching you how to format it. If we had more time, I would. But for the purposes of the weekly quiz or the week 12 quiz or the week 14 quiz, don't worry about being beautiful with the word processing. I just want to know that you know how to get the parsing, and you can copy it into a Word document, or you can copy it into Moodle or whatever.
Double click on a box on one of those boxes.
Thank you.
That help? Okay. Where was, oh yes, I was looking at Keynote. Okay. So we're at the Onion page. Okay. So, so we were going through week by week. Last week, we just kind of had a bit of a poke around in the veggie drawer. This week, we want to think about time and aspect in English, in Hebrew, and in Greek. Okay, that's all. And we've got about 15 minutes to do it. Okay, next week we'll do mood and voice, And the week after that, we'll look at infinitives and participles. Okay. So in English, we mostly indicate time by our tenses. So English tenses are heavily mortgaged to the function of time. That's not true for Hebrew and Greek. Okay. So the time element is going to be conveyed in other ways. Now, it's irrelevant, but lots of languages do that. So, for example, when I went to when I went to Indonesia at the end of year 12 with my Churches of Christ minister before I went to Bible college the next month, within 4 or 5 days in Indonesia, I was able to give little talks in Bahasa. Okay. Because Bahasa is a very simple language. The verbs are not conjugated. So if you want to talk about the present or the future or the past, you do that in the next word or the previous word. Talk about tomorrow. So, and if you want to make it plural, you just say the noun twice. Okay, so you have one orangutan, you have orangutan. You have Rajul, 2 people, and so on. So even after 50-something years, I can still remember the basics of Bahasa. And I was only there for 3 weeks. Okay. So I remember we met a very wealthy Chinese businessman who was sponsoring some of our costs. And his question to me was, so Greg, what tongues do you have? And I'm sure my Church of Christ minister nearly died as I answered. I said, well, I did French at high school and I'm going to be learning Hebrew and Greek at college next year. He wanted to know, did I speak Swahili or ancient gobbledygook, or what gift of the spirit did I have?
Oh, right.
I was totally not in that conversation. And I'm sure Mr. Webb was just going, oh, shut up, idiot. Anyway, so even in English, we still have 3 aspects of the verb: continuous, undefined, and perfective. Continuous is I am walking, or I was walking, or I shall be walking, will be walking. Okay, that's describing an action that is continuous, whether it's past, present, or future. Undefined is just I walk, or I walked, or I shall walk. But I'm not telling you whether I'm going to do it repeatedly or continuously or habitually. I'm just saying I walked.
Sounds like me tidying my room when I was a kid.
I tidied.
Yes.
Yeah.
I will tidy. I shall tidy.
And perfective means I've done it and it's completed. And in the case of perfect, it means and it is still tidy. Okay. Or if it's pluperfect, which you may or may not even know about, but it does exist in English, that's when we have had instead of has. Okay. So I had eaten. Like if I say, oh, no, thanks, I have eaten, that means I'm still full. Okay. I don't need anything else. I have eaten. But if I say, well, I had eaten, it sort of implies, well, I had something to eat, but by the time it got around to the service, I could have eaten the legs off the tables. I was so hungry. So it had happened, but it was no longer true. It was no longer reality. Okay. Continuous, undefined, perfective. Always from the perspective of the person who's writing or speaking, not from our perspective. Okay. Because that's who's using the verb. All right. So in Hebrew, bearing in mind that we're going to be relying on our software until we get around to doing a class with Zoe. So, and there's 5 or 6 pages that might be worth looking at in Hebrew for the rest of us if you're really wanting to try and get your head around this. We will, of course, rely on the parsing given to us by the software, and we've already mentioned, it's helpful to at least when the parsing says it's cal or pl or puel or whatever, that we don't go wheelbarrow and skip to the next word. We actually have at least some idea. Oh, that's describing the 7 or 9, whatever it is now, I can't remember, different kind of houses or groups of the Hebrew verb. In amongst this, you also have, across all of that, you have perfect verbs and you have imperfect verbs. And those 2 words mean something different in Hebrew than they will in Greek, just to make it fun. In particular, imperfect in Hebrew tends to indicate something that's not yet finished happening. It's probably coming soon. So it's kind of future. Imperfect in Greek means, well, I used to do that, or I was doing that. So don't worry about that. Obviously, the original Greek and Hebrew grammarians didn't have a little concordance chat as to how to use their labels. Okay. And we've talked about, well, certainly on Monday night, we talked about perfect because it's one of the most common forms of Hebrew. Okay, so we've seen these before, but okay, we'll come back to that in a minute. So the perfect, which is the one that we're a little bit more familiar with, that's so in the third person masculine singular, which is what you're going to find in the Hebrew lexicon. It's just going to be the three letters, typically the three letters of the stem, okay, the shoresh, and then it's just going to have a and at, katal, okay, or dabar, or whatever it's going to be, okay. So we're not going to learn all these, but looking down, there are some patterns which hopefully will start to make sense. And I've lost my cursor somehow. Okay, really not sure where it's gone. Let's see if I can bring it back. Oh, it's right down the bottom. Okay, so surprise, surprise, the third person feminine has an R sound at the end, like Sarah and so on. The second person tends to use the ta sound. First person singular tends to use e, it, and we saw that over here with I, ani, okay, and so on. Well, if we were doing a lot of Hebrew, we'd very quickly get to realize a verb that ends with u is probably they, okay, third person plural. Kataltum and katalten are the second person plural, and the first person plural is nu, and that might be a word that some of us are remembering from the exercise this week, because in the Shema, Eloheinu, our God, okay, God of us. So these are the pronominal suffixes, but they also become the suffixes on the end of the verbs in the perfect, meaning past tense of the verb. Okay. And there is some overlap, but not perfectly. That's just how language works. In terms of translating it, then it's he killed, she killed, you singular killed, you singular feminine killed, I killed, they killed, you all killed, you women all killed, we killed. Okay? You want to use a different stem, don't you? You want to practice a different shoresh. I can tell. You could use Natan, give, and so on. But this is the one I learned in the Church of Christ Bible College, so you're getting it still. Okay, and imperfect. So imperfect is not future tense, but imperfect means the action is yet to be completed. And instead of putting stuff at the end, mostly you put stuff at the beginning. Okay, now there's a couple of bits at the end, but and guess what? So it's going to be yiktol, tiktol, and so on. I love the first person singular because it uses aleph, which is kind of cute. Okay, so ektol, yiktalu, because the u sound tends to be third person plural. Okay, tiktalu, and then notice the first person plural. It's n. You're using the n. It tends to be. We've seen it as nu, but then the n is a kind of an indicator of first person plural. As guess what? It's the same in Arabic as well. So in this case, you translate it as he will kill, she will kill, you singular will kill, you feminine singular will kill, I shall kill, they will kill, you will kill, you will kill, we shall kill. Okay. Now, the main thing I want to note here is that apart from the different banyin, the different kind of stems, you know, kal and pl and pilau. The most common aspect of verbs you're going to encounter are going to be whether they're perfect or imperfect. Perfect, and you'll get this from accordance, and perfect is going to mean we're talking about something that's already completed, and imperfect is typically going to mean we're talking about something which is not yet finished or not yet happened. Okay. Again, the same sort of patterns tend to be there. Okay, so this is just a reminder of those basic stems. So the kal, simple active, simple passive or reflexive, intensive or repeated. And I think these are the things that I think are incredibly clever of Hebrew as a way of playing with verbs. We often have to use quite a number of different English words to capture what's going on. Okay, simple active, simple passive or reflexive, intensive or repeated if it's PL, puao is passive but intensive or repeated, causative, so making something happen. Okay, passive causative, he was made to do it. That's like the devil made me do it. That's where that one comes in. Okay, and then hithpael, which is passive but intensive. So the killing part is intensified as well as being passive. So there's a whole world of Hebrew verbs out there which we're just kind of driving past in a fast train, and we're not trying to get our head around it. Just going to rely on accordance to tell us. And it's going to be much the same in Greek before Chris starts smiling and thinking we're going to be different. Okay, very similar to English and Hebrew, undefined, continuous, perfective. This is a chart worth paying some attention to and even learning. It's an attempt to try to capture graphically what aspect means in the Greek verb system. Okay, so aorist is just like a moment and the action is done. We'd almost say done and dusted. Okay, like in English, I drank. Okay, I drank. Yes, Juliet. Bingo.
You've shown this before, haven't you?
No, it probably looks a bit like the diagram for prepositions. But like the diagram for prepositions, this is a really good diagram to look at from time to time. So present tense means starting now and moving into the future. Present, it's underway, it's currently happening. Future means it's not happening yet, but it will start happening soon and will be continuous. Okay? Perfect means it happened back then and it is now finished, but it is still in effect. Okay? Pluperfect meant, well, yeah, it was done back then, but that was last month's parish council. Now we're going to talk about it all over again, just like it never been discussed before. Okay?
Still not.
You'd almost think there was a backstory there. And imperfect in Greek is past tense, but it means was or used to. I was drinking. I was reading. I was walking. I was tidying up my room, whatever. Okay. So this is a neat little chart for the aspect, how aspect and tense kind of play together in Hebrew, in Greek. I'm sure it would be, we could probably create a similar thing in Hebrew, but it's, you know, really we've just got to think about perfect and imperfect. So that might be worth something that you actually kind of do try to commit to memory. There aren't many things I say are worth remembering. Sorry?
What's that? What was it? Imperative. You must learn that. No.
Yeah, well, imperative. Or it could have just been a subjunctive. I was exhorting you. Would be a good thing. So in Greek, we've seen what it looks like in Hebrew. in English words. Let's try the same thing. So in Greek, present tense undefined, for example, I fall. See? I'm not saying whether I fell repeatedly, but continuous means I am falling or I keep falling. Okay, I'm falling over and over again as I get older. Perfect means I have fallen. Okay, and I'm not yet been picked up. I'm still on the ground. Okay. Past tense, past time, the aorist is the undefined. It just says, well, it happened. And it's in the past. Okay. Imperfect was, I was falling, I used to fall, or I fell repeatedly, habitually. I was just a basket case till I got my motorized scooter. And pluperfect would mean I had fallen, but it's not saying anything about where I am at the moment. Okay, I had fallen, I had driven into a tree when I went off the highway, but then this nice man from Ipswich stopped and he patched me up and put me on his donkey and
Soft tires.
okay. Future time, undefined future is just future. I shall fall, he will fall. Continuous future would mean I shall be falling, I will be falling. I will be thinking. I'm not doing it yet, but one day I will be thinking. Or I shall repeatedly fall. I'll be stumbling along, future tense, but continuous future time. Future perfect is there will be a time when I shall have fallen. I shall have eaten. Okay, so it is in the future, but it has a completed perfective dimension. There will be a time when I will have done this. Sort of like a student with an essay. There will be a time when this has been submitted. May not be realistic, but that's the, all right. So, wow. So I just want to look at aorist and imperfect. Okay. So we know how we build the verbs. We take the stem, we add bits and so on. Okay. The inflections are going to be personal endings or they're going to be the bits to do with tenses. Okay. We did this last week. The only thing that's new there is the way the different vowels, when they bump into each other, so epsilon plus epsilon tends to become eta. Epsilon plus alpha tends to become eta. O by itself tends to increase and become O instead of O. And SA plus nothing just stays SA, and that's important for the aorist. Okay. So this is the present, the future, the imperfect, and first and second aorist. And we're just going to look at the ones down the bottom. Okay. So the stem is, in this example, is aku, as in akua, I hear, okay, as in acoustics. So, so if it was present tense, it's just aku, and then you add the extra joining vowel, and then it becomes a kuo because it can't stay as a kuo. It's just too hard for the Greek to say that. Present, the future tense, you just whack a sigma in between the verb stem and the personal ending of the present tense. But only the present tense. You can't just whack a sigma into an aorist or an imperfect or a pluperfect. You build the future from the present by inserting the sigma. That makes it future. Okay. So imperfect. Imperfect is different way of getting there. Imperfect and aorist, you're going to put an epsilon on the front. That means, of course, that an epsilon plus an alpha is going to become an eta. Okay, that's when it starts to get tricky when you're looking at a Greek verb, and it won't just look all pure because it's already done a couple of shape-shifting exercises because of the impact of various vowels being put next to each other. Okay. So it's going to be epsilon plus aku, and then they're going to use the secondary endings. So it's going to be a set of endings starting with on instead of starting with o. And I think I've got something in a minute which will show you that. Oh, I'm not quite that fast. Okay. The aorist is going to be very similar, but you're going to insert a sigma alpha. That's going to be the thumb print for the aorist. Okay. And then you're still going to use, it's got its own set of endings. So notice I said before the epsilon plus aku. See how it's going to become an eta here? So up here it was akuo, akuso. Now it's become akuon, because the eta, the alpha and the eta have, alpha and the epsilon have got heavy enough to make an eta. Same down here. Epsilon plus akuo becomes akusa. And when you get to second aorist is just a verb that can't be made the way a first aorist is going to be made. So they get their verb stem from somewhere else, and it uses the same endings as the imperfect. But you won't get them confused because you won't get this form in the imperfect. So let's have a look. I've got them here side by side. Here's the imperfect, which is past continuous of luo. Eluon, elues, eluet, eluomen, eluette, eluon. And notice first and last are the same. Okay. Then if we go to aorist, first aorist for luo, elusa, elusas, eluset, elusamen. Notice omen, samen, elusate, elusan. Now the reality is the ones you're going to see the most are probably going to be third person singular, third person plural. Okay, they're the forms that are going to occur a lot in narrative. So you'll get to recognize those quicker. Second aorist, ebelon, ebeles, ebelet, ebelomen, ebelete, ebelon. Again, it's the software that's going to tell you what you're dealing with. What you need to be aware of is there are different ways of talking about the past, which include imperfect and aorist. And there are two ways of building an aorist, just as there are in English, which is what I've got on the side. So that in English, we have some verbs that totally change how you write them when they go into a different sense. Bring becomes brought, buy becomes bought, and so on. Okay. Whereas first aorist is more like our words like smile. You just add a D on the end. Smiled. Talk, you've got to add ED on the end and so on. Okay? Similar kind of patterns, not something we've got to learn, just something we're going to run into all the time, and the software is going to explain it for us. So going back to the example we used last week, here's a verse from Mark chapter 1. John the Baptist is talking. Ego, I, ebaptissa, I will baptize. Sorry, it's aorist because it's going to be I baptized. Okay. Ego ebaptissa humas. I baptize you, hudati. It's the word for water, but it's dative, so it means with water. I baptize you with water, but der autos, he will baptize, baptisse, humas, same word, you, accusative, plural, and pneumati hagio, it's with really, but in spirit holy, and it's all dative, so it means with. I baptize you with water, he will baptize you with Holy Spirit. Okay, but the point there was ebaptissa, aorist, and baptissi, future. Okay, now we've run out of time basically to do the accord and software. It's just looking at the map tool, which is not a critical exegetical kind of skill. I did do a 15-minute video the other day, so it looks like that's going to be the way to do it. But let me just show you one little tiny bit of eye candy. So you all want to go and play with it. Ha, ha, ha. Well, okay, so we'll get rid of all this stuff. So suppose I'm wanting to open the atlas. I can do it because I just go up here and click on atlas because I've already put it up there. Okay, otherwise you've got to get it from the library. So I'm going to choose light colors. Okay, I had the Greek text selected as having a SPAC attack. I can't say that anymore. Okay, sorry. My childhood disgusting language comes through from time to time. Okay, so this has just happened to be a random zoom in on the Sea of Galilee. I can zoom out, obviously. And you can choose what you want shown in terms of roads and highways and other things. What I want to show you is just one simple little trick. So if I want, for example, to do, I can just drag an area over the map. Okay, now I can right click and copy that into an essay as a picture, or I can come up here, click on the map and go auto, and it doesn't show up in accordance. So that was a total waste of time. I wonder if I can get it to show up if I go back here. Yes, I can. Okay, so this is what I just created. Can you see this little doobie here? It's a 3D map. Now, I didn't bother to turn off the labels. So you've got Canaan written up and down over the mountains and so on. Obviously, you don't have to have that. But I can also do cute little things like, okay, if I was playing around with this a bit more, no, this is causing an earthquake in Jerusalem. All right, so you can play around with this, and kids love it in RE classes and so on. But amongst other things, it lets people see the profile of the biblical land with the mountains up in Lebanon, the depth of the Dead Sea, and so on. So you can play around with it, and it's obviously better if you don't leave the words on. I just wanted to show it as a quick thing. So you simply select and drag over a bit of the map, come up here and click on the map icon, and then you have a choice as to what level of distortion. But more recently, they've introduced an automatic ratio, which works really well. Okay, so you have to do that by watching the video, which I put up a couple of days ago, because we need to have our break now and come back in 15 minutes, ready for the tutorials.